Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Tricked Before. This time, Relics. Yeah, we're not talking about our host, Relics, on this episode of It's All Been Tricked Before. You know, Scotty's in here, and he can fix anything. You know what might fix you? Patreon.com/IABD. Just a couple bucks a month, and you get so much. But maybe go on to the other levers. I can't do it, Captain. You know what? You can. You can, and it's worth it. And you'll be like, why did I wait this long? Just like you might have waited so long to get on board with this. Just like Scotty waited so long. He was lost. Relics, It's All Been Tricked Before.
Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Tricked Before. Your regular hosts are here.
This is Steven.
And Keith.
Jimmy-Jerome just got out of the transporter after 75 years, so I don't know what's going on with the podcast, but I'm sure you guys will catch me up.
Oh, it's
and I'm not too old to jump in.
It's very similar to the way things were.
So we're here to talk Relics. First impressions.
For me, I was surprised at how little I remembered that this episode was going to come up. I think as I got into it, I was like, well, I think I do remember having seen this before. And I forgot it was going to happen. I'm shocked that Jimmy didn't give anything away leading into this. Because, I mean, there was a hint of something in the sense that he originally wanted to do this episode in person, because that meant that there was going to be something significant about it. But, you know, I didn't look into the synopsis or anything. I didn't really think about it. Oh, I didn't look at the cover either. I didn't even
cover of the novelization.
No, that's funny. But yeah, the transporter buffer is being mentioned. Like, it's got to be something like probably an original series or somebody significant coming out of this. The theory surrounding all of it, or the science they get into, or the science, whatever. It felt good. I mean, it felt legitimate for and a lot of things we would have been talking about in the past, hypothetically. So
I thought it was going to be more of a total fan service, and there was some fan service, and a trip down nostalgia lane, or just and this was definitely part of the episode. Obviously, was people getting our treatment of the older segments of our society, but it also was a very meta reconciling or reckoning between TOS and TNG. And a good story and a good use, I thought, of Doohan and Scotty. And I went into it with reluctance, and I came out of it with my TOS heart was very warmed. And it was, not to give anything away, but as we record, Strange New Worlds has had 2 episodes, which is completely warming my TOS heart. I love it. I love it so much so far. But so, yeah, I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought going in. And I can see why it's liked a lot. It wasn't the token appearance like McCoy had. It wasn't, it was one and done. It wasn't quite unification. I liked it a lot. I don't know that it hung the moon, but maybe I definitely enjoyed it a lot. And as we get into it, I think it did some good things overall.
So I also have enjoyed Strange New Worlds. As you can see, I have a mustache in tribute. I won't elaborate to prevent spoilers for Keith.
Yeah.
That's one of my most unexpected favorite things.
I loved it so much.
I kind of wish it was Paul Wesley playing the character, but that's okay. It's fine. Anyway,
if you're going to have a character like that, if you're going to have a guest appearance like that, that's the way you do it. He's happy throughout the episode, focused on his experience. It wasn't like this, hey, we're advertising this to get you to hook you in and make you watch this episode coming up this week. Guess who's here? And then spend like half the episode dancing around it, making it seem like something surprising is going to happen. Here he is. We're getting right to it. Stayed with the story.
And actually, my very first note is they just jump right in. This was one of the great. We've had, and they do a good job on TNG. A lot of like, we're just throwing you in right in the middle of this, and they're like, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. There wasn't even a captain's log, or maybe there was. Maybe there's a short captain's log, but they jumped right into it. Not necessarily the Scotty, but what was going on in the episode, which I really appreciate.
I mean, Scotty, shut up real quick. But my first impression, I read this novelization back in the day by Michael Jan Friedman, and this is what I remember. I don't think I'd seen the episode until today. So getting the episode was different than the story in this book, and I love the story in this book. A little note that I found interesting at the beginning of the book is Michael Jan Friedman said he was given the screenplay for Relics to work off of, and he was only given 31 days, 4.5 weeks to write this book. So a month. That's impressive because I really like this book, and it's pretty great. But what you were talking about, how the show jumps right in, there's a 35-page prologue to this book before that episode starts. And the thing is, I'll spoil my alternate episode right now. I wish they'd done a two-parter and made this book, because the episode to me felt rushed, but I don't know if that's because of the narrative, the extra parts of the narrative I have versus what was on screen. If I hadn't read the book, I may not have felt rushed. I don't know.
Was the prologue with Scotty and the Nolan? Okay.
Yeah. So the prologue was 75 years ago. You got to know, not only did you get to see Scotty on the Jenolan or Jenolan, whatever it is, but you got to know several members of the crew, including Franklin, who we learned died in the transporter buffer.
Poor Frank.
But we get to know the captain. We get to know Lieutenant Sachs. Scotty's telling stories to the young officers, remembering the Enterprise. Scotty's told he used to be an engineer, so you already start that stuff. And actually, even before that takes off, there's a dream sequence where Scotty fell asleep in the library and is dreaming of hang gliding, which is very reminiscent to the deleted scene that opens Star Trek Generations, the deleted opening scene with Kirk freestyle jumping from the atmosphere that didn't actually make it in the movie. And they mentioned in the prologue that Scotty joined the Enterprise under Pike before Kirk joined, which makes sense. Maybe we'll see him in Strange New Worlds eventually. But we get to know these characters before it happens and see Scotty work one last miracle to get into the transporter. And there's all these passengers, and Scotty does everything to save them. And when they're all strapped in and secured, and only the 4 people left on the bridge are risking their lives, so they think. But when they crash, they realize there's been a hull breach and everyone in the safe pod died. Oh, and so did 2 of the other people that were in the bridge with them. So Scotty and Franklin are the only survivors. And so by the time Scotty gets beamed into the transporter buffer and realizes Franklin's gone, the loss hits you so much harder because you've gotten to know these characters a little bit, and you've seen Scotty do everything he can to try to save everybody, and he's the only survivor.
You know, as cliches go, as far as the way the story could have been told, I'm not sure I would have liked to have known that much before he's found. I kind of like the surprise of like, what? Scotty's here. Like if you did like a 2-parter and had maybe started with the Enterprise discovering this place, ending with Scotty ending up in the transporter all of a sudden. What's going on? Next episode, you begin with that prologue, and you go back and tell that story up to the moment where he is saving himself, and then.
See, I think opposite. I think you start with the big extended Scotty sequence. You get 10, 15 minutes in the episode, you haven't seen the Next Generation crew. You're still 75 years in the past, and you start to wonder, what the heck is this episode? Are we going to get to our people? Is this also in the past? Like, how cool is that? Now, I feel like that's something they do today, not back in the 90s, but I would have really liked that. The other major thing that's cut, and this is also in the book before we get to the Gentleman and rescue Scotty, as we're introduced on the Enterprise D to Ensign Kane, who you do get to see in the episode. He's the redhead that tells Scotty in his quarters what's going on, played by Eric Weiss, best known for this role and a one-off in DS9. He's got 14 credits, so not very. He was a crewman in Conundrum, so I guess we'd seen him before. But there's a giant subplot in the book about him and the other ensigns. And it's kind of a lower deck story about he's really cocky and egotistical, and Riker's giving him all the crap duties, and he thinks Riker has a personal vendetta against him. So he goes to Picard and tries to get Picard to pull rank, because like, hey, you knew my father. You know I deserve better than how Riker's treating me. And Picard talks to Riker, and he's like, hey, Riker, this ensign, is there a problem? And Riker's like, no, sir, he's awful. I'm treating him this way on purpose. And Picard's like, does he really deserve to be treated that bad? And Riker says, yes. And Picard says, okay, I trust your judgment. And so then there's this whole subplot throughout the episode where this ensign's getting more and more ticked off at Riker, and Riker's treating him like crap. So that scene with Scotty is just one more insult to him of being put on babysitting duty in the midst of a longer story.
That's amazing.
That's awesome, because I'll jump to it. He was my most annoying person in this episode.
Oh, not mine.
I wrote that he's like, I gotta get back to work. On what? You're ensign hospitality. This is your job. But now it makes sense that I love that backstory that's not his job. And it makes so much more sense then.
No, wait, was he actually titled as hospitality?
Huh?
No, that's the title I gave him. But watching it without that context, it's like, what do you have to do? This is your job. You're supposed to show people you take care of visiting envoys or whatever and everything. But apparently it was a job, which makes it that makes sense. But I'm not changing my mind about it. It's still my mind.
Well, without the context.
Yeah.
I was going to say, without the context, I actually related to the ensign in that situation. You know, haven't you been in those kinds of jobs or situations where it's like, I'm doing these other things. Here's this, and somebody's like, giving this story, and it's like you realize I'm at work right now, and I have to kind of
every day, Keith.
So.
Yeah, I will talk more about the resolution of his plot when we get to another giant sequence that wasn't in the episode that's in the book. Cool. But other than Scotty, he's probably the second main character in this book. Like, it's really all about Ensign Kane and Scotty.
That's weird. Awesome, actually.
And Ensign Kane's relationship to the other ensigns, because he talks a big game. And he tells the other ensigns, like, oh, I handled it. Riker's going to be kissing my boots now. And then Riker still treats him like crap, and he loses all face with the other ensigns. And especially Sousa, who's, like, trying to befriend him. And he's like, stop taking pity on me, dude. I don't need your pity. And it's it's great.
That's actually awesome. I mean, that's what a novelization should do. At least two of the things you described already are like, that's what it should do. Expand and give you context.
And so that's why I don't know that I'd want this actor, because he doesn't seem very good to be a leading person in this episode. But to do the Kane story and the Scotty story fully, I think would have been a really awesome 2-part episode. So that's right. So now we're at the beginning of the episode itself, where, they got the hail, and they're going to the distress call. We learn about what the Dyson Sphere is immediately. Yeah, it's not a mystery.
So I looked into that a little bit. That's a real thing.
Yep.
And the guy that created the Dyson Sphere, Mr. Freeman Dyson, he came up with it, but he did not take it seriously. He stated upon watching the episode that while the science behind the story was nonsense, from a TV viewer's perspective, he generally enjoyed it. So
interesting.
That's courtesy of Wikipedia. But yeah, when they said 20th century, I'm like, space age maybe, or whatever. But so I thought that was, I liked it as a piece of science, and I thought they actually examined it to an extent, even though by the end of the episode, I was like, wait, did we learn anything about what was going on there? And then Picard's like, well, we're going to send back some science vessels. They'll take care of it. And that gets to, like, there was, I think it was you, Jimmy, or I don't know which one you guys said, it was kind of rushed or felt a little rushed. I think there's something to that. Yeah, Jimmy. I think there's something to that, but I'm not sure it should have been a 2-part episode, but I'm going to talk about that later. But anyway. Yeah. Okay. So that's the Dyson Sphere.
Before we move on, I don't know why I'd heard of it before. I'm glad they explained it. So I was like, wait, I feel like I should know that. I don't know why I've heard, but I've definitely heard that term Dyson Sphere before. And
it made me think of the vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, that too.
But, so they also, the ship, the Janolan, I looked into that. That is or at least the number one thing reference to Janolan I found is that it's a set of caves in Australia. They're the most ancient discovered open caves in the world. So I think the idea was these caves that were around, they were open enough they could house peoples or people could live there, that kind of thing.
Nice reference. I will say, if it was a 2-parter, I feel like it would have ended up having a similar tone to Encounter at Farpoint, where you've got this mystery, and that may not have been the best thing, even though I want the other scenes that were missing. Well,
and I'll go ahead and jump to it. I teased it, but I was doing the thing I make fun of all the time. I teased this thing. It's like, you know what, let's talk about it. Because at the end, I'm like, oh man, there's all these, I wanted more of the Scotty stories and blah, blah, blah. But part of the thing of this episode is like, this is the Enterprise now. That Enterprise is cool, and that Scotty stuff's cool, and you guys can dig that. Go do that. But we're selling the stories of this Enterprise. And so I thought it was fitting the way. There's so many meta things in there that I really liked and appreciated that still warmed my TOS heart, and that was one of them. I thought it made so much sense to be like, we dig you, dude. We respect you. Go ahead. Don't retire. Keep telling those stories, but we got to tell our stories here. Yeah. And we'll see you around. So I really like that aspect.
About the Dyson thing, I wondered if he elaborated on what about the science was nonsense. Was it just the way they were implementing talking about the 250 million planets inside this sphere, or? Yeah,
I'm guessing that, you know what? I'll look into that.
Well, the resources to build something the size of our sun's orbit would mean you'd have to mine resources from many solar systems and bring them to you. Like, you wouldn't have enough resources in your solar system to build it, I wouldn't think.
Well, I mean, you wouldn't think that all those planets would be inhabited necessarily, so they could probably just like take an entire planet and do something.
Well, they're not. I mean, the surface area is the same surface area of 250 million Earths.
Right,
is what they're saying.
Yes.
But like it's an enclosed sphere as big as Earth's orbit. That's huge. Well, you try to picture it, and the episode did a really bad job of showing you scale of just how big it is.
Right.
But if you think about if all of a sudden we had a wall in space that went around Earth and the moon and the sun and everything in between it, around their whole orbit, that's some massive stuff.
So Freeman Dyson actually just passed away in 2020 at the age of 97. He wrote his paper in 1960, The Search for Artificial Stellar Sources of Infrared Radiation. But it was first mentioned in a novel by Olaf Stapledon. The novel is called Star Maker, in which he described every solar system surrounded by gauze light traps, which focused the escaping solar energy for intelligent use, which these guys were going for solar energy way ahead of everyone else.
No, the only thing I would say about what you're saying about the scale of how this, the sphere would work. I mean, I think of it sort of like the way you would, like the small intestine, if you were to actually stretch something like that out. I mean, if you have a couple of planets worth of resources stretched out or, hammered out into whatever, it's not as, but I think the time and space, I mean, how would they do that? I mean, how long would it take them to do something like that? Is it nanotech? I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's kind of part of the reason, part of the genesis of it, callback, is that the idea was an advanced civilization would just need more and more energy needs. But obviously they couldn't be sustained by one planet, which, again, that's very forward thinking, but we're there. So it makes sense that they're like, well, you need to have a star and be able to harvest its power even more. So that was kind of where Dyson and Stapledon kind of jumped off from.
Maybe they could do it with a transporter technology. Implementation, again, the sphere. If they had advanced enough transporter technology, maybe they could have repeater arrays to...
and a lot of this refers to like, this is impossible now and would be very difficult, but someday it's going to be needed. So...
The fan service aspect that Stephen was touching on. I think it's like they kind of wanted to make you as a fan sort of squirm, like, don't you know who this is? Because Scotty is essentially saying, don't you know who I am? Don't you know what I've done? Mm-hmm. And, they're like, okay, maybe I read something about you, maybe not. They probably wouldn't have read about the engineer necessarily, right? You hear about a Kirk, but you wouldn't hear about the Scotty. So they were just like, they're not like starstruck, like you would think someone would want to,
Lower Decks would beg to differ. That they are all super famous. I feel like especially Geordi should know who the miracle worker engineer is, and on the ship that he's serving on the current iteration of. And in the book and in the show, nobody seems to know who Scotty is, even after he says his name. They have to be told, oh yeah, he was on the old Enterprise with Kirk and Spock. They don't, and they've met Spock, they've met McCoy, and they don't know who Scotty is. And they don't know he went missing under mysterious circumstances. That's weird too.
Retcon thing, maybe.
But the other thing that's really weird to me is when Scotty realizes they're the Enterprise, he goes, oh, I bet Jim Kirk himself got it out of mothballs and came looking for me. And we know that we haven't got to this in the podcast yet, but in Star Trek Generations, Scotty was there when Kirk disappears. And so I guess you could argue, well, he's confused because something traumatic just happened, or maybe he thinks Kirk eventually reappeared.
That makes sense.
And then came and got him, because as of in the canon Star Trek, when Scotty gets trapped in this transporter beam, he knows Kirk has disappeared and doesn't know what happened to him, and is presumed dead, which we'll see in the film. So Scotty was there on the Enterprise B when Kirk went missing.
All right. Well, in a backstage sense, which thing was written first? I mean, do you think that they're just written first? So they just contradicted in the movie, perhaps, or
they wrote the movie about a year and a half later. So I think you can make it make sense that it's not a canon error, but at the same time, it feels a little odd if you've seen Generations, then go back and hear Scotty say, "Oh, Kirk came to rescue me," when, as far as he knows, Kirk is missing, presumed dead.
It just seems like somebody probably made an error, or they just didn't know, that kind of thing. Or
they just they invited the whole original series cast for that movie, and Kirk, well, of course Kirk was it, but Chekhov and Scotty were the only two that accepted, so they're probably like, we don't care, these are the two we got, let's just go with it. Scotty does briefly tell the story of basically the prologue on the Enterprise after he's rescued in the show. It's just so much quicker than it happens, unfortunately. All Oh, in the book, it's O'Brien that beams him back. O'Brien has 2 brief scenes. Makes me wonder if in the screenplay it was O'Brien and they just weren't sure if they were going to get him or not. Similarly, Guinan has a 1-scene cameo. She actually gives him the whiskey directly instead of a server or Data going behind the bar. But again, you have to wonder, they just write O'Brien and Guinan in these episodes and then check actor availability later.
Well, like you would have to
bring Guinan in for just one brief scene, really.
Yeah.
Or maybe the author was just like, well, you don't have the transporter guy in here. I like O'Brien. I'm putting O'Brien in it, you know?
James Doohan was listed as James Doohan as Scotty. And then he tells everyone, call me Scotty or whatever. But everybody else, and we talked about this at least once before, that everyone in the opening credits has their rank and their name in the opening credits. And maybe Doohan was like, nah, Scotty. I don't want to be Captain Montgomery Scott or whatever. But anyway.
Yeah, Scotty was played by some young actor named James Doohan. You may have heard of him. That's known for Star Trek and Star Trek 4 and Star Trek 6 and Star Trek 2. Sorry. So he has one more Star Trek appearance coming up, as I alluded to, in Star Trek Generations. But I'm trying to think. I think at this point in the franchise, D. Kelly was done. I don't think he ever comes back in any new Star Trek. And I think Nichelle Nichols doesn't come back for any new Star Trek.
Yeah, but and I will tip my hand on my alternate episode was they find Uhura in a transporter trapped.
Still wearing the feather dance outfit.
if that's what it took.
But I think those are the only 2 because Shatner's still going to return, Doohan, Koenig, Takai, and Nimoy. So and Grace Lee Whitney.
That's right.
And Majel. So I think we've only said goodbye to DeForest Kelley and Nichelle Nichols at this point. Star Trek 6 was the last Star Trek for both of them, but they were the only 2. Which is unfortunate because up until the day he died, DeForest Kelley kept talking about he wanted to do another Star Trek with Shatner and Nimoy. He thought the 3 of them would do another adventure. They dropped the line on Scotty, wait till you see the holodeck. In the book, it like takes a second to basically make clear that he's never heard of a holodeck, where in the show it was they immediately cut so you don't know how he react. But I have to say there was a holodeck in the animated series, so he's familiar with holodeck technology in its early form. But maybe they just meant it's so much better now.
I guess it would have been canon then.
I think in this era, the animated was not canon. They had taken it out of the canon and hadn't been put back in yet.
All right. Oh, so wait, it's canon now. I got that back.
It is canon now.
It is canon.
But I don't think it was canon when Next Gen was running.
Okay. That makes sense.
So in the show, Kane shows Scotty to his quarters. In the book, one of the lines Kane says to Scotty is, you've got a full wardrobe in the closet all in your size. Which I was like, why did they go ahead and replicate all the clothes for him when he could just replicate whatever he wants to wear?
Right.
He does drop an Elon of Troy, as Scotty does reference.
I wrote that down too. Yeah.
In the book, he references a lot more original series episodes. There's only a couple in the television show, but in the book, there's a lot.
So, do you guys think he mentioned he was headed to retirement? We know two of the episodes in We Didn't Love You, the one Wolf in the Fold and Lights of Zatar. Scotty has love interests. Do we think Scotty never got married and had kids?
No.
Because he never mentions them. He was also married to the ship, I guess.
Wait, no, you don't think that, or no, you don't think that it happened?
I think there's a novel where he's got a granddaughter or something, but in canon, we've never seen any kids.
In canon, I don't think there is in canon. In my mind, Keith, Scotty would have eventually had a family if he didn't already have one in TOS.
But
we've never heard.
If he's going to retirement by himself, if he had a wife, she's dead.
Oh, that's a good point.
Or divorced.
Oh, that's possible too. That makes sense because he was married to a ship. Spent all the time.
Well, Kirk was married to the ship. Scotty was the ship's mistress.
That's it.
So there's a scene between Scotty and Troy in the book, which I'm sad they cut because the only shot we get of Troy in this episode is at the very end where she kisses him on the cheek and it's totally unearned because we haven't even seen them interact.
Yeah, I was like, that doesn't make sense. Okay, yep.
Yeah, she gives them a counseling session essentially in the book.
You were mentioning, how rushed it felt. Like you wish they had the actual prologue of the incident for us to appreciate the tragedy of what happened. And it's kind of funny, again, almost in a meta way, that Scotty kept trying to convey this to everyone, like how sad this was with words. Essentially, Franklin was such a good guy. It's pretty tragic. Uh-huh. And Geordi's like, well, moving on. Hey, have you seen this? It just reminded me that I don't know. Have you seen the Loki series on Disney Plus?
Yes.
Yeah, the memes they had of him. Yes, that's very sad. Moving on.
Well, in Scotty's day, they only had 470 people on board. Now they got 1,000. So one person, not that big a deal. Who cares?
But no, it was more, I guess, the execution of it. They're trying to have Doohan try to get this. Oh, I'm so just gut wrenched about this thing that has happened that I'm trying to pass along to an expository information, and it just keeps not landing, and they keep having to move the scene along. So I can see what, yeah. And also about the Troy thing, that makes me wonder why that would be like the kiss in the cheek. I mean, that implies that it existed somewhere. Like, do you think it was in the original screenplay and it just got cut?
That's what I would assume. I feel like if I'm an editor on this episode, the scene, which we haven't gotten to yet, and I want to talk about some other stuff before this, but the scene with Scotty and Picard on the bridge of the old Enterprise was all you needed to dig into Scotty's psyche. Anything else is extraneous if you have to narrow this down and cut this down. So that's what they did instead. I mean, Troy fails to get through to him because, of course, his story has to keep going. But I really greatly enjoyed the scene in Engineering where Scotty's like, how long is it going to... Jordy's like, I told Picard this will be done in an hour. How long is it really going to take you? An hour? What? You can't tell him the truth.
What is that from?
I love that. Just the idea of Scotty.
Scotty always multiplies his estimates by 4 so he can seem like a miracle worker.
Well, no, I've heard that before. And I can't remember where else. I know I've heard it, but I can't remember where.
I swear it's come out on screen before. I could be wrong, but I swear it has. I know he's definitely used a similar line to like, this is going to take this, but you said you need it now, so I'll see what I can do. I know he's done that before.
There's several episodes in TOS where we can't do it. We need more power. And I'm also doing the Scotty equivalent of comedy or comedians and people of Kirk, people doing bad Shatners. And so I like that they were just like, yep, we're recognizing that this was the thing and we're going to make it into a joke. And then later it gets called back in the episode where he's like, we can't do all this stuff. And he's like, I'll get right to it.
It'll take me a week, but since you don't have a week, let me see what I can do. In the 10 forward scene, it's probably a good thing Guinan wasn't there because that would also probably break the Generations continuity because she's on the Enterprise B when Kirk disappears as well. So that would be all messed up. But anyway, the whole synthol doesn't taste like scotch. I guess this answers our question is synthol any good as alcohol? And the answer is no. No. They've just gotten used to it.
I don't know.
But I did enjoy that Picard's the one that gave Guinan the bottle.
I think I would have had a similar reaction to Scotty. Like, what is this? Actually, the scotch I wouldn't because I think scotch tastes so terrible, and I don't understand scotch. So
you'd think Scotty would specify a brand of scotch or something, though, right?
He ordered it like people order beers in movies and TV that I make fun of all the time.
Give me a beer.
I'll have a beer. Okay.
Yep.
I think if you go into a place and say, I guess maybe you could get away with saying, is there such a thing as a well scotch?
I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
But I think the bartender would then confirm, you want well or you want this? Or...
Yeah. I mean, if I go somewhere and say vodka and Sprite, you're right. Some places will just be like, all right, I'm giving you the well. And some places will be like, well, we've got this, this, and this. Yeah.
If you order a mixed drink like vodka and Sprite, I think sometimes they'll default to well. But if you just order vodka straight up, they're going to ask you for specification.
Yes.
And he just ordered scotch straight up. So Data describing the green liquor. He's like, what is it? It's green. That was really good too.
So that is a callback to By Any Other Name, which you guys may have read. It's the episode with Barbara Boucher. It's the one where they crush the cubes. They turn everyone into cubes except for key personnel. And then Scotty drinks the guy because they're trying to understand their humanoid form. That's also the one where after the commercial break, they come back and Barbara Boucher's brushing her hair and Kirk's putting his boots on. That's all. But in that episode, Scotty's going to drink the guy under the table. And he's like, it's going to be real easy because he hasn't been a human, but he has to work a little harder. And at some point he pulls something out because they're running out of booze. And he's like, it's green. And so that was a nice callback.
Amazing.
Very nice. Yeah. So at this point, Scotty goes to the old bridge. And this is the part, Stephen, where I really think you would have liked them to do the book version, but I don't think they could have done it with the technology of the 90s. Because in the book, the holodeck asks him to specify a year and a time to go on the Enterprise bridge, because of course it changes over the years.
Sure.
So it really doesn't make sense in the show. They just let him in. And he specifies right after the Triskelion mission, and it was his anniversary on the ship. and all of the characters appear in it. Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Uhura and Sulu and Chekhov are on the bridge with them, and they're interacting with them. But it would have had to have been them then, not them now, which I don't think they could have done.
Right.
So when Picard comes in, he actually interacts with them as well. And like Spock seems to know Picard somehow strangely, but it's a very interesting. I mean, that scene means so much more when it's not just an empty bridge to me.
Yes,
when he actually is with his old buddies.
I thought that's what they might have. That's something they might have wanted to do, and obviously, like you said,
I think just a couple years after this, they're going to do a thing where they digitally put actors back in an original series episode, and it looks pretty good. It's probably about 5 years after this.
Right.
But I don't think the technology. I think the technology was brand new then, and isn't there yet. And also, this scene is purposely written so Scotty can interact with them, so they could just take old scenes the way the Deep Space Nine episode does to solve it. So that would be now in today's current CGI. I think they could make it work, but to de-age the actors and stuff.
Just that little dip, 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 bing, dip, dip sound effect was like, okay, I'm home. And that was one of the things in Discovery. Every once in a while, they would throw that sound effect in there. It's like, oh, okay, so they're showing us that it is, even though we're looking at it, we know this is. I guess it is the same era, but it's not. But I like that they would throw that old sound effect in every once in a while on Discovery. This was probably
hits home though to see that set though. They did such a good job of rebuilding it. It looks exactly like it used to.
Yeah, and that whole conversation is so meta about this is my home. This is where I want to be. Scotty was talking like the TOS fans at the time, because we talked about a couple weeks ago with the documentary. Like I'd forgotten that people were like, no, I want my Trek people, not these new Trek people, and I feel like he's addressing it right there. Like, well, this is home for me, and this is what I know. And Picard's like, well, yeah, I get it. And, Picard is the one person who finally comes in and is like, I revere what you did, and that's awesome and should be appreciated. But, I've got this new enterprise, and this enterprise, yada, yada, yada. And it was just like, yep, you're right. You're describing exactly what's going on and what's happening. I enjoyed it on the level of what was happening in that world and also in the meta world, for sure.
Well, Picard can really relate because he was captain of a ship before the Enterprise. He brings up the Stargazer.
Yes.
And there's novels set during his time on the Stargazer. He had another set of senior staff he was close to. One of them appears in Star Trek Picard. So it's like his old Stargazer doctor. He's got that history before the Enterprise, and so he can relate to Scotty on that level in a way the younger officers can't. And the whole scene where Picard tells Geordi to go with Scotty, and he's like, I'm not going to order it, but you need to make him feel useful. He's owed that. Was such a good scene. And I will say LeVar Burton's acting in that scene of seeing the different emotions go through him as he understands what's going on is good. We'll get to why I found him annoying in the first half of the episode, but the second half of the episode, he's great.
Yeah, I think the early on stuff was a little over the top as far as the old man who's outlived his usefulness. And again, I think that gets to the rushing, the smushiness of the episode, which is if you just found a guy from 75 years ago and somebody even says like, you should go to sickbay, and he does eventually, but he's like, no, I want to check this out. But I mean, I might just be speaking for myself, but if I woke up 75 years from now, I'd check out a bunch of things before I started asking about what's that and what's that and what's that and what's that. Obviously, I've never been on a starship, but I just think, and I know 75 years from now, I'm just going to wake up to a vast wasteland if I woke up. It'll be Mad Max. And, but
World War III.
Right. The eugenics war, spoiler alert, the eugenics war are finally shown on Strange New Worlds, and it'll be somewhere in the middle of that, or after that.
So Geordi praises the old ship when they beam over. All of that's really good. It's I like that. I like the way he reaches out to Scotty, and I like that Scotty doesn't hold a grudge and make him work for it. He just takes it at face value and appreciates it. Like,
I was going to say
he was busy then. Now he's not as busy. He has time for me.
Yeah.
I can understand why he might be stressed out earlier.
Yes. I was going to say something very similar earlier, that I like that there was various, I thought it was a pretty subtle nuance. I like the way that they played that, where you could kind of see Scotty sort of processing what Geordi was doing and almost like he decided, you know what, I'm going to accept this. I mean, he could have been like, why are you patronizing me? He could have done all kinds of things there, but it was like, you know what, I appreciate this gesture, and they moved on from there.
And I think the progression that makes the very end scene at least a little bit earned. It could have not been earned at all. It was more earned. Yeah. And as Jimmy alluded to, the acting of LeVar Burton. And guess what? Jimmy Doohan, also good at, he finally got, is this the only, Wolf in the Fold, I guess, counts, but it doesn't to me. And Lysa Zatar is one of the worst episodes. We definitely agree. This is the best Jimmy Doohan episode ever, right?
That's true. He got more development in this episode than he got in 79 episodes of the original.
I think, and he says, I wrote this down. I wrote a lot of his quotes, but he says, "Captain my rank, but never wanted to be anything but an engineer." But I know, when we started this a long time ago, some of I'll throw my brother and my sister in on this. Some of our favorite moments are when Scotty's in charge of the Enterprise, and I think that's a commentary on that. That's all that character cared about. But he was a pretty good captain too. So I think he's even allowing for, you know what? Yeah, I deserve that rank. I earned it. But I'm better at this. But
I don't think he was captain of a ship. I think he took the captain right as he was retiring.
You're right.
I deserve the rank and the pension, but
right.
I don't think he was ever captain of a ship.
Yeah.
So there is a bit in the book where Riker talks about the experience of transporting that I think goes completely against canon, because he says he always expects it to feel like something and to feel like some type of physical transition. He's like, but it always feels instantaneous to me. I'm 1 minute I'm here, the next minute I'm there, and there's no time at all in the beam. And I'm like, that's
that in the episode?
Didn't we just do it last week? Wasn't it just last week with Barclay?
I know, that's what I'm saying. As they're writing the novelization, they wouldn't have seen that episode, but I still feel like they should have done better.
Right.
So this is where the book adds a whole nother subplot when the Enterprise is in the Dyson sphere. So how Picard asked Data to search for life forms. Well, in the book, Data says, most of it's barren, but there's one area I can't scan. There's extra shields up. I can't get to it. So Riker and Troy and the two ensigns, Sousa and Kane, take an away team down to the surface and are walking through all these empty abandoned buildings. And then Kane messes with something, and like all these big winds are coming, and they almost all die, and Sousa gets hurt, and it's this big deal, and it adds even more urgency to the Enterprise escape, because when the Gentleman opens up the sphere, and it's like, you got to get out now. Not only is the Enterprise dealing with failing shields, but their away team's still down the surface. They can't beam them. The away team has to get back to the shuttle, and the shuttle has to get back to the ship, and it's a whole thing. So that's where I feel like it would have turned into Encounter at Farpoint with the beam down and everything. Yeah. But they don't actually encounter anybody down there. It's just nice to have a Riker Troy adventure away team story and tie up the ensign's story.
Yeah, and part of me wanted to know more about, again, what was going on inside there. I like the visuals and everything, but another part of me is like, you know what? That, again, same as the Scotty stories. That's for another episode. That's for a novelization about the two science vessels going and checking it out. So.
Yeah. Data, there is another just throwaway in the book where Scotty's head, he's thinking Data's brow creasing slightly in concentration is the equivalent to a panicked scream. I think Picard says that, which I'm like, that's wonderful. That's Data's panicking, is just crunching his brow slightly. It's in the episode, but you may blink and you miss it. Do you notice that while Geordi's on the Gentleman and they're inside the Dyson sphere, Picard basically puts Riker in charge of engineering? He's at Geordi's station on the bridge, and then Riker goes in the terminal and says, I'll go down there and see if I can get it back online. And I'm like, why is Riker in charge of engineering? There's all these engineers on the ship that are so much better qualified.
Well, he might have meant he was going to tell them to do it.
Yeah, in the book, it's very clear Riker's taking over engineering. Oh. In the show, it's more subtle, but yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. When they're talking about Scotty and Geordi on the Gentleman, and Scotty's thinking of things to get him through, it occurred to me that Scotty is a lot more innovative than Geordi. And I don't know how much of that's personality and how much of that is Scotty lived in the time when these things were being invented, and Geordi lives in a much more subtle and stabilized universe where you don't need to be innovative. You know, because you've got all the technology you need, whereas Scotty didn't have all the technology he needed.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know. I think that Geordi has been innovative in his own way, but it's just, there are certain kinds of things that he wouldn't think to even try to attempt, or wouldn't, as you were saying, need to have tried to attempt.
Yeah. So when they brace the door open with the Gentleman, why is the Gentleman right in the middle? Why don't they go to the side so the Enterprise has plenty of room to go past them, so they don't have to blow them up the Gentleman to get out?
Leverage? I don't know.
Also, how do they beam Geordi and Scotty off the Gentleman through the shields? Because you can't beam through shields.
That occurred to me. I don't know. Is there such a thing as like non-blocking shields or something?
Maybe that's only in the novelization, and they couldn't fit it into the episode.
No, the novelization does not explain how they beam through the shields.
Okay.
My only theory is this is an old ship. The Enterprise knows how to beam through an old version of the shields.
That's where I was
and they've got newer shields now.
Yep.
Nice.
But at the same time, it feels really stupid. And of course, there's a scene in the book of O'Brien struggling to beam them back. Did he get them? Did he not? Which in the show, they're just like, yep, they're fine. Here's a shot of them stepping down from the transporter pad. And at the end, when Geordi's telling Scotty about Leah Brahms, at that point, Scotty tells Geordi about the Tribbles in the book. I like that.
I mean, part of me likes that Scotty had a story that wasn't TOS, but the fan service part of me is like, no, tell one of the better stories that we already know.
Yeah, that's all. And like I said, the end scene where the entire senior staff shows up to say goodbye to Scotty feels awkward and forced because we haven't seen him interact with like any of them except Geordi and Picard, and especially Troy's kiss. It felt very much like this is our send-off scene. We need our full main cast here.
Yep.
Regardless of whether it's relevant or not.
I agree. I mean, Crusher fixed his arm, whatever, but that was very short too. I totally agree. It felt very like, this is the part where we do this. And we see that.
Crusher had some interaction with him.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I love the way that Worf played that then too. Essentially, it wasn't earned either way. It was just like,
Well, because Scotty was like almost offended that Worf was on the bridge wearing a uniform.
I have a few other notes. These are all very quick notes, probably. These are mostly Scotty quotes. He says, "Your doctor's a far sight prettier," which I consider shots fired at McCoy and Mabenga. I mean, obviously, Gates McFadden.
I mean, Crusher is prettier than McCoy and Mabenga, but I'm a McCoy fan, so
sure. I thought early on when he nobody wanted to hear his stories, but people on the ship, I'm sure he would be a great personal speaker. Like, I spent 75 years in a transporter, and I have all these stories about the old days. Because I was trying to think of like somebody. I was trying to think of someone equivalent because I was like, well, why wouldn't they listen to this guy? And I'm like, you know what? I'm not. People. Well, my mom's Scotty's age or whatever, or she's 7. Well, no, my mom's been alive as long as he was trapped in that transporter. But I was trying to think, but I'm sure that there's plenty of. I mean, I guess for example, the actors from TOS Next Generation, they're all getting to the older age. I listen to their stories all day. So, but I thought, he could totally do a speaking tour. He would be booked all through the galaxy. He could.
But he would not be happy just speaking. I don't think.
You're right.
Like, he likes to tell stories, but he needs to work on
He would want to, do more.
Of course, there are plenty of other novels where we see that he gets to go do engineering things again, because he's in his 70s. Both Scotty and Jimmy Doohan at this point are in their 70s age-wise, which for the Star Trek future is not that old. So he's got decades left in him. And we occasionally see him in the novels.
And that's where, like I said, at the end, I'm like, well, those stories will get told, and they did. And so, and this necessarily wasn't the forum. Speaking of, and I saw him, Scotty, we watched Buck Rogers as a special episode, as you Patreon folks would know, over our last break. And I think if you go with the Buck Rogers premise here, because Scotty is more like, I want to learn about this stuff, but he's not like amused or surprised. There's nothing that really surprised him other than the technological advances in engineering, but like the rest of this, the galaxy or the universe in this year, in that era, and maybe it did, but we just didn't see it. Where he's like, oh, that's a new thing. Mm-hmm. Well, other than Worf, that's the only time we have that. So that's a story that maybe gets told later, or could have got told later, and wasn't for this this episode, but I think that would have been more interesting. My last note is this is more of it's a 21st century thing. It's a many century thing. He says, never get drunk unless you're willing to pay for it the next day. And truer words have never been spoken. So that's all I got as far as notes.
Cool. I will say this episode was written by Ron D. Moore, who's one of our regulars. Mm-hmm. It was directed by Alexander Singer. This is the first Star Trek episode he's directed. He'll direct 5 more of Next Gen, including the 2-parter that we've got coming up here real soon. He also directed, looks like 6 DS9 and 10 Voyager episodes. And Voyager were his last credits on IMDb. So He finishes out his career doing a bunch of Star Trek, although he did not die until 2020 at the age of 92.
I'm going to finish out my career the same way, doing a bunch of Star Trek on this very podcast. Because we're never going to run out.
I like it. Did you have an alternate episode, Stephen?
Yeah, it was They Find Uhura. And so,
right.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, and she's the ultimate cougar in the 24th century.
Of course.
I wanted to add something to one of Stephen's points when he was talking about the public speaking tour. Mm-hmm. I think that highlights just how the episode was written in a very, well, I mean, obviously for dramatic effect. Mm-hmm. If Scotty were simply just in 10 forward, I'm sure people would love to hear his stories because they're on break and they want to hear these. They'd be very interested.
Right.
But they kept writing his character as though he just had no concept of timing or filter or appropriate, interactions. Like, you should stop what you're doing and listen to what I'm saying because,
right.
I don't know how realistic that would be, but,
and I think that goes to my other thing of if we woke up 75 years from now, we would not be like, hey, I got to tell you about this thing that happened one time on our podcast we used to do. We would be like, whoa, what's that? Where's my family? What happened to this person or that person?
Well, not only that, I think if you would go out to a store or something, or you realize you're in an office, you wouldn't start interrupting what people are doing and saying, "Hey, why don't you want to hear my story right now?
Right,
you're insulting me."
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Who was your annoyance of Relics? You said Kane, Stephen?
Yeah, ensign director of hospitality.
I got to go with Geordi in the first half of the episode.
He is rough.
Pretty awful. Not at all understanding. Not at all sympathetic. And I get that they're busy, but I feel like finding the engineer of the original ship that your ship's the latest iteration of, you offer him some respect.
Yes. And do we think Scotty would just start touching things and wouldn't appreciate that this is not his enterprise? Okay.
Yes, I do.
All right.
I think Scotty would touch everything.
Fair enough.
He knows it like the back of his conch. Keith, who was your annoyance?
Gonna have to go with Scotty the first half as a counterpoint. It's just the same. It's the same point. I mean, I related much more to Geordi in that situation. I mean, when you actually have to stop and explain something to someone, it was like, hey, look at this thing. I've been Scotty in those situations too, and I understand how annoying it can be if you just, oh my God, I see something. This, it's like, but no, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh, shit, I feel bad now. Yeah.
Now we're getting really meta because Keith is talking about me talking about TOS the first 2 seasons of this podcast. So I think.
That's funny. Are we all going to have a drink with Ensign Kane? Is he our drink guy? I'm kidding. Are we all having a drink with Scotty?
Pretty much.
Yeah, I as much.
And it's going to be a green drink, I assume.
Yes, as much as I would like to have a drink with Ensign Rager, because she played by Lene Chapman, who played Sid Field's housekeeper on 2 episodes of Seinfeld. Much as I would like to have a drink with her, I gotta go with Scotty. There's no way. I'd have to have a drink with Scotty, and I would do what he said. What he said about I would be willing to get drunk enough that I would pay for it the next day, and I most assuredly would pay for it the next day.
Well, and I would be like Picard. I'd want to hear the stories because I think Picard wants to hear the stories. So, absolutely, yeah. Ranking the episode. Let's start at the top. Better or worse than Realm of Fear, the Barclay episode?
I love the meta aspects, and my TOS heart is going to put this above.
Yeah, I'm inclined to say if we're talking about just how well was the episode written and the ideas and everything in it, the Barclay episode's better, but it's Scotty. So how do you vote against Scotty? So for that reason alone, yeah, I think I'm going to vote for above, even though I do think objectively Realm of Fear is better, but subjectively you got to go with Scotty.
Yeah. I don't think it crushes Realm of Fear by any way. I think for me, the nostalgic stuff tips it over the top.
I think this was good enough to be like, okay, we gotta rank it high. Whereas if it was a more mediocre episode, we'd be like, I don't know.
And I think my lower expectations because that's another thing. I was sure they were gonna cast him into a different dimension or kill him at the end or whatever. Or he's gonna I need to stay here with the Dyson sphere. The fact that they're like, nope, he's just gonna go on to his other stuff. That also made me very happy. So,
what do you think, Keith?
If we had more time, I would have gone through with my little joke about. I can't remember what the episode was. It's toward the bottom at this point, but wrestling with whether or not to put it below the one that Jimmy hated so much. What even was it?
Zero Part 2.
Yeah. Anyway, I would go so far as to say that even objectively, the way that they used Scotty, as I was saying at the beginning, made it even better than it would have been. Yeah. This is how you would use a guest star like this. They did it properly. So
yes. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I certainly wouldn't go any lower than Realm of Fear, but I think there's an argument to be made that Realm of Fear might be a better episode, but I can't in good conscience argue against you. So we're going to put this number one of the 4 so far.
It's early
of this season, which isn't very far in, but it's good enough. Next week, we are going to watch Schisms. Commander Riker's inability to fall asleep begins to show at other members of the crew in other forms, putting the Enterprise on the trail of a mystery. That just sounds bad, doesn't it?
That last part really sounded bad.
Was it the way I read it or just in general?
In general, the actual words, not the way you read it.
Yeah, the fact that he's not sleeping and starts to affect the rest.
We did a whole episode about not having sleep.
Troy.
Really? I feel like I've seen that episode like 4 times.
Yep. And if there's a mystery to be solved, it's going to be resolved in minute 44, and it's not going to be satisfying.
Yeah, I don't remember the episode Schisms. Maybe it's great. Maybe they finally figure out how to do this type of episode well. But my first instinct is crap.
Yeah.
But until then, live long.
And live real long without being trapped in a transporter buffer. I'm going to call it buffer zone. Buffer pattern. Don't be caught in a buffer pattern. Although there's worse ways to go. And
I mean, 75 years in the future wouldn't be too bad.
I guess he found a time machine, really.
Yeah.
If we could just get past what's going on right now, hopefully 75 years is enough to, like, the world's gotten better.
I want to believe that will be the case. That if I'm not in my 120s by then, I hope that the world that is left behind is doing well.
It's All Been Done presents
Who's Got the Time?